Okay, Brill. I think most people are in and we're joining. And good morning, everybody. A warm welcome to today's Leaf Surgery. My name is Will Sibley, and I'm very pleased to be introducing you to the session. For people in the audience who have not attended a Leaf Surgery before, Leaf runs regular monthly online webinars with its members and wider audiences. And usually these sessions fall on every second Friday of the month from September to May. And the focus of these sessions alternate around different themes that are relevant to food and farming. And we're joined by brilliant guest speakers for each of these sessions to talk about the topics. Yeah, and we really enjoy running these sessions and interacting with our audiences, hearing different perspectives from different speakers, and of course, learning a lot more about these different topics that are relevant to all of us here. For today's surgery, we are focusing on biostimulants in crop production and how biostimulants could potentially play a valuable role and be used as a tool for promoting more sustainable crop production. And also, what does research tell us about biostimulants at the moment? Where are the gaps in order for them to be applied more widely and successfully used by farmers? So we're joined by a fantastic speaker on this topic today, Francis Dodds, Editorial Director of Burleigh Dodds Science Publishing, to explore this theme. And very warm welcome to you, Francis. Thank you for joining today. And we'll hear more from Francis in a moment. But before we enter the work of biostimulants, I've got a few prompts for our audience today from Leaf. On the 12th of March, so on Monday next week, we will be launching our first public consultation on the latest version of the Leaf Mark Standard. That's version 17. And the consultation will run to the 10th of May. So there's a lot of time to read through that and give your feedback. And we really encourage you to have your say on this. And then a number of different ways you can do that. So we'll be opening an online survey, which you'll be able to complete. There will also be a series of webinars looking at the key changes to the standards, and there'll be registration links for those webinars on our website and social media. And then, of course, directly contact us with your feedback on the standard via email. Secondly, last week, we launched the Leaf Education Impact Report of 2023. And again, please do visit our website and the Leaf Education page on there to read the report. Fantastic highlights and impacts that are coming out of that report. Just to name a few here. Over 290,000 young people engaging activities downloaded from the Countryside Classroom resource of the Leaf Education website. Over 260,000 young people engaging in Farming Fortnight, which is, huge achievement for that annual fortnight to showcase the farming industry opportunities there for young people and careers. And then lastly, over 600 farmers trained in CVAS training, and that is Countryside Educational Visits Accreditation Scheme. So huge number of farmers now trained in that area of being able to host different classrooms of young people and students coming on to farm and learning more. So some huge achievements there of the Lead Education team, and congratulations to them all there. And then leading on from that, I just want to finalize with a couple of events that we've got coming up that we wanted to share. We have an Open Farm Sunday event on the 20th of March at Bagborough Hall Business Centre in Northamptonshire. And this event will give the opportunity to meet other Open Farm Sunday hosts, exchange ideas, and also get hold of free resources on about how to plan an Open Farm Sunday event, which of course is coming up in June this year. And we are readily preparing for that huge annual event that is coming up. So please do get involved if you're a farmer in the audience and you are planning on running an Open Farm Sunday this year. And lastly, we're really pleased to announce that we're running an event at Dyson Farming in Lincolnshire on the 25th of April, exploring sustainable water management across the agri-food sector. And this event will feature speakers including RAP, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, Cranfield University and the River Waveney Trust. And this event is part of our Beacons of Excellence project, kindly funded by the Aurora Trust. So event details of this will be published very soon on our website. And please do keep an eye out on our socials to save your place. Okay, yeah, lots going on. I realize that big updates and plenty to get involved with. And we welcome and appreciate all the engagement from all our stakeholders and members in what we do. So please do get in touch if you're interested. Okay, so getting into the discussion today. But before we start, just to say as well, it's great to see so many people here today, and thank you for joining. And we really appreciate any engagement from you. So please do send in your questions and comments to Francis in the chat function, which is somewhere at the bottom of your page. But we'll get into it. So Francis, please could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do?
Absolutely. Thanks, Will. Well, I'm Francis Dodds, Editorial Director at Burleigh Dodds Science Publishing. And despite the name, we're not a wrestling tag team, but we are, in effect, an academic publisher. So what we've done is specialize in publishing the key research, which is underpinning sustainable agricultural practices. And I might mention that our program's recently been praised as, and I quote, a unique endeavour to gradually consolidate knowledge on sustainable agriculture. The publisher should be applauded for producing a truly impressive, authoritative, and ever-expanding knowledge compendium on how to improve the world's food production systems. So we appear to be doing something right. By the end of this year, we should have published 150 odd titles with contributions from over 4,000 agricultural and food production experts across about 2,500 chapters. So, quite a lot. And that includes, which is really why I'm here, this book that we've published on biostimulants for crop production. So that's edited by a team of 5 leading experts in the field, including Patrick Dujardin of the University of Liège, who I think is one of the pioneers of the concept of biostimulants. And the book's got a team of 30 authors, and it summarizes over 1,000 studies on biostimulants. And I'm basing my talk today essentially on the research in that book. Yeah. So hopefully that's a useful introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And what a space to be in terms of research and sustainable agriculture. So yeah, sounds very
exciting, dynamic area. Yeah. Yeah.
And great. So then moving on to biostimulants, you've just shown the book that you've published. Just wondered if you could give a quick overview of what exactly biostimulants are and how should people understand them in terms of definitions.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's worth saying that the term sort of emerged with people like Patrick Dujardin in the 1990s, and for a while there were quite a lot of different terms used. For example, plant growth enhancers, or even terms like plant probiotics, but biostimulants now seems to be the main term that is used. And there's quite a good working definition in the 2019 EU fertilizer regulation, which defines a biostimulant as, quote, a fertilizing product, the function of which is to stimulate plant nutrition processes independently of the product's nutrient content. So that sounds a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is that biostimulants should be seen as distinct from fertilizers and plant protection products such as fungicides and insecticides, including, it's worth saying, the biological equivalents of pesticides such as biopesticides, which now tend to be called bioprotectants. So the role of biostimulants is to modify and improve plant physiological functions, for example, the ability of the plant to take up and utilize nutrients rather than necessarily adding the nutrients to the plant. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview as to what biostimulants are and how they can be distinguished from other things out there. Yeah.
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, the different terminology around them, I think you've clarified pretty well there. So thank you. In terms of the actual content what's would you find in a biostimulant? Of course, that's something organic as opposed to chemical. But I wondered if you could maybe go into a bit of the
Yes.
content, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth saying that biostimulants are a pretty broad and fairly eclectic group of materials that may not have a huge amount of obvious relationship with each other, but can be defined as biostimulants because they perform the same similar sort of functions. So the two main groups are kind of non-microbial biostimulants and then microbial biostimulants. So if we run really sort of quickly through the types of non-microbial biostimulant, you have, for example, humic substances such as humic acid and fulvic acid, which are one of the most more established group of biostimulants. Then you've also got the category of seaweed extracts, which contain bioactive compounds such as phenolic compounds. You've then got quite a broad group of protein hydrolysates, which are mixtures of polypeptides, oligopeptides, and amino acids, which are derived from plant and animal protein sources using hydrolytic techniques to process them. Then you've got another category, which is inorganic compounds such as silicon or selenium, and then a whole range of other things like betanes and polyamines, chitosan, phosphite, and other inorganic salts. So that's quite a broad group. And then you've also, and perhaps people may be more familiar with these, you've also got microbial types of biostimulant, and those include plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, PGPR, as they're usually abbreviated to, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, abbreviated to AMF, and then a range of nitrogen-fixing bacteria such as Azotobacter and Azospirillum. So, yeah, a very, very broad range indeed of those different types of material. So I hope that gives you a quick overview. And then I could, if you like, we'll go on to their modes of action, which is what kind of links all these very, very diverse materials, if you think that's the appropriate next thing to discuss.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. In
Yeah,
that
great.
that you've just gone through a huge range that you could that fall within biostimulants of natural um, natural things of organisms and bacteria, etc., and how in relation to how soil is a huge biodiverse natural resource, but also full of different organisms and living things, and the relationship with how plants efficiently grow in that soil. Where do biostimulants come in terms of the what actually goes on underground?
Yeah, well, it's worth saying that there's although the subject's been explored for since the 1990s, and although we've published a book that has 1,000 separate studies of biostimulants, there's still a degree of uncertainty about exactly how they work. So, for example, seaweed extracts have been used one way or another for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, because people simply found empirically that using them seemed to work. They had no idea necessarily how. So although they're in a well-established category that have now been sort of categorized as a biostimulant, I think a lot of academics would still admit that they don't know fully how they actually work. So there's still a degree of uncertainty there. But there is now quite a lot of research which has identified some of the main modes of action of all these very different biostimulant materials and what kind of they therefore have in common through these modes of action. So the main modes of action relate to improving nutrient use efficiency, and then improving tolerance to abiotic stress, and then improving resistance to biotic stress. So if it's okay, I'll sort of go through each of those in turn. So if we start with nutrient use efficiency, oh gosh, and one thing I completely forgot to mention right at the beginning, which I mentioned to, is that you might be seeing that I'm referring to some quite detailed notes, so I don't forget what it is I'm supposed to be talking about. So if anybody wants those notes, then please do just let Will or me know. I'm very happy to pass them on so that you don't have to be scribbling desperately trying to follow what I'm trying to say. Anyhow, sorry for that going off at a tangent. Back to modes of action relating to nutrient use efficiency. Well, research suggests that there are various mechanisms by which that occurs. So one is called root foraging, which is basically the way that particular biostimulants promote the growth of root hairs and root numbers by, for example, stimulating plant hormones regulating growth. For example, that's what humic substances tend to do, and you can see images of root hairs, and you add in your humic substances, and you see dramatic improvements in root biomass. Then another mode of action is root mining, where biostimulants enhance the solubilization and mineralization of soil nutrients, which is just then make them easier for plants to assimilate. For example, that's something that's been linked to seaweed extracts. And then the final mode of action in terms of nutrient use efficiency is what's called internal utilization, where biostimulants may improve the nutrient flow and uptake by plants themselves. So, for example, by promoting the activity of membrane transporters, which control chemical transport through plant tissues. And again, that's something that's been associated with humic substances, for example. So that's the nutrient use efficiency side of things. But biostimulants are also recognized as potentially helping to plants to deal with abiotic stress. So, for example, plant growth promoting rhizobacteria in seaweed extracts can produce phytochemicals such as auxins, which stimulate hormones affecting plant growth. And this and various other mechanisms seems to be able to allow plants to resist abiotic stresses such as drought. So again, there are different sort of mechanisms by which these biostimulants seem to work. So, for example, they can work as defense primers, i.e. reinforcing plant defenses before an abiotic stress event occurs, as rescuers, i.e. helping the plant during a stress event resist it, and then as restorers, helping plants to recover after a stress event. So, for example, seaweed extracts may work, are thought to work through a hormonal priming mechanism, which prepares plants better for stress like drought, while, for example, amino acid biostimulants seem to work as rescuers by helping plants to recover from drought stress, for example, by promoting faster water reabsorption. So that's various modes of action which cover abiotic stress. And as people might know, biostimulants can also help plants combat biotic threats. So microbial biostimulants in particular, like plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, can help do this, for example, by simply competing with other pathogenic microbes for nutrients in the soil. If they outcompete them, then they suppress them. And then, for example, they also seem to generate antibiotic compounds as a defense mechanism themselves. And they also, because they have this very complex, extraordinary symbiotic relationship with plants, they seem to be able to produce signaling molecules that stimulate the plant's own sort of resistance response to attack. So that's various mechanisms relating to biotic stress as well as the abiotic stress and the nutrient use efficiency. And the net result of all those different modes of action is benefits such as decreased need for fertilizer input because nutrient use efficiency is improved, potentially increased yields. There has been also linked to improvements in product quality and also improved resistance to stresses such as drought and pathogen attack. So I hope that gives you a broad overview of the modes of action that kind of collectively define these different biostimulants.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. An absolute plethora, I think,
Yes.
of different different potential and observed
Mm,
through scientific research on these different abilities that biostimulants can have and bring
mm.
to plants and how they grow from the different functions and just to I guess buttress growth in different phases and different ways.
Yeah.
So in light of that, and then bringing this to the research again, but more focusing on how has this been applied in the field, um, in terms of real life scenarios and environments in a farming context. How well have they performed? Because they must have seen that there are biostimulant products out there being sold, and of course the research behind it. But from your knowledge, um, how should farmers think about using different biostimulants in different farm settings?
Yeah, well, that's really the kind of million dollar question, because despite the fact that there have been all these research studies, I think the key, and it's an ongoing challenge, is that all the kind of laboratory and controlled environment studies that academics will typically use to identify and track these modes of action, because that you have to have a controlled environment to be able to produce valid and reproducible results. That's all very well, but those results do not necessarily translate into consistent results in the field. And we're still at the stage now where there need to be more field trials, and there also needs to be more and long-term sort of commercial use of biostimulants to sort of build up the evidence base for their use. I mean, a key issue is, of course, that biostimulants, the whole way that they work is that they have this very complex relationship with plants, and how they interact with plants is complicated, and still some of it is still being researched, and they're still struggling to understand it. And that therefore means that we're not necessarily in full control of all the variables that might affect how a biostimulant might actually work in a particular context. And it's also worth saying that, as mainly organic rather than inorganic materials, biostimulants are simply more vulnerable, more variable in composition, and they're far more sensitive to environmental conditions. So just to give you an example of that, if you take something like arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, it depends on quite a complex range of factors, such as plant species and cultivar, soil characteristics, environmental conditions, and management practices. So they need pretty careful handling to be effective. So we're kind of in this rather difficult sort of transitional stage where we know in theory that they work, but in practice they're working on a particular farm in a particular context. That is still it's still a bit of an unvariable, and there may be an element of trial and error. It reminds me, I spoke to farmers recently about using organic amendments, and they have a very similar set of dilemmas, in that organic amendments tend to be more variable than synthetic fertilizers, and therefore trying to work out how to use them in combination with topping up with synthetic fertilizers is a more of a trial and error process than they thought. And to some degree, I think this will probably apply to biostimulants as well. I mean, it's worth saying that if you're considering using biostimulants, you should definitely be looking for products that are backed by a combination of laboratory controlled environment trials and field studies. And ideally, they should be supported by independent trials from the company that's selling the product. And I know, for example, that NIAB, AHDB, for example, have done some sort of trial work, and various universities have done that as well. Obviously, one of the great things, if you can, is if you're considering product X, is ask them, who's actually used it, and then maybe speak to the farmers that have been using it and get, a sort of a real view as to how effective they are. This is not really my area, so I'm speculating a bit here. But I believe that there is an authorization process for biostimulants in the EU through the fertilizer regulation. So I believe that if a product has gone through that process, there's quite a sort of complex dossier of evidence that they have to submit, then that will indicate that there is a reasonably robust body of evidence. And I believe that the Environmental Protection Agency in the States has an approval process for to regulate biostimulant use in the States. And I imagine the bigger biostimulant producers will have probably gone through that process. So somebody may be correcting me here, but if they've done that, then it's worth checking whether they've got this sort of approval, because again, it gives you a bit more of a bit more reassurance that a degree of rigor has been put into this particular biostimulant product. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
No, it is. Thank you. I think you've illustrated how complex this space is in terms of dealing with one, the huge amount of variables that can come with on the farm or farm setting trials. And then especially if you're looking into these microbial and cellular interactions at a very, very tiny scope that, yeah, are affected by those variables. So it's quite tricky. And I think you're right in that the more this is trialed out on the field, the better understanding we'll all have. And on the regulation side, yeah, you got into that. I think there was a question from our audience a bit earlier in terms of the regulation. And that applies to the UK as well in terms of what the EU is doing, or the UK is a bit more less
Oh
advanced.
gosh, this is not my area of expertise. So the short answer is I don't know. I am assuming that in this sort of case, the UK is likely to follow, the general approach that's been adopted in the EU. I can't see any particular reason why there should be a divergence here. And I imagine there is quite a lot of pressure from the biostimulant market sector. There should be a level playing field, for each country, and therefore uniform sort of regulations and standards. And I hope that that there's a degree of uniformity with the states as well. I think there's a bill going through Congress at the moment, specifically trying to define biostimulants, because I think that's still an ongoing area of debate, how to define them, because they are so broad ranging, and how to work out what degree of regulatory oversight they need compared to, for example, to synthetic fertilizers, because obviously they're not the same thing, but you obviously need a sort of flexible framework which allows the biostimulant market to develop and not to have to go through hurdles that are just not useful for anyone, but still they are properly regulated, and therefore people can rely on them when they see them.
Yeah, great. Brilliant. And I think this will be your final question before we hand over to Megan for the Q&A and with your audience. Yeah, above of what you've all just said, Francis, what do you think it is the future of biostimulants based on the research that you've been involved in or published, and why? And why are they important as well? We didn't talk about that too.
Yeah, I think they certainly will have a role, because obviously we're all on this journey towards net zero. So, there's a huge focus now on improving nutrient use efficiency because, I think everybody knows that the research suggests that about 50% of nitrogen fertilizer never actually gets to the plant. It disappears off elsewhere. And if you're not careful, straight into a water course, and then you're into all sorts of trouble. So if you can have anything that kind of improves nutrient use efficiency, then that's potentially a significant benefit in addressing that question and in contributing to net zero in that way. And we're now talking about increasing weather instability through climate change. So you need to build in as much resilience as you can. So if biostimulants can be part of that role in improving crop resilience to periods of drought, for example, and we are likely to get a lot more either extreme heat events or rain and flooding and all that kind of thing, then clearly they have a role to play there. And if they can contribute, for example, to reducing the plant's vulnerability to biotic stress, that means you're less reliant on using pesticides, and that again is something that I think everybody would want to do where they think it's feasible. So I think it's definitely got a significant role to play as part of a wide range of these regenerative practices. The thing is, of course, none of these is in itself a silver bullet. You have to basically combine all of them and to some degree experiment with different combinations to try and get the combination that works for your particular farm. And part of the challenge of where we are now is working out those combinations that work. We've got a great body of evidence and principle how each practice, whether it's use of biostimulants or anything else, works, but the way of combining them and deploying them in a predictable way that then maintains yields and reduce input costs so that a farm can make this transition to a kind of regenerative model. There's still a lot to work out there, but biostimulants are definitely going to be part of that.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll wrap up the questions from me there, and I'll hand over to Megan to go through the questions from the audience with Francis. So yeah, please go ahead, Meg.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Francis. That definitely got all of our brains working on a Friday morning. You've actually been very good and answered quite a lot of the questions as we've been going. So some of the first ones were about that authorization and the regulatory side of things, and you've obviously touched upon that in terms of staying in line with the current EU legislation. But one of the other questions which came up from a PhD researcher who's in the call was, how can biostimulants affect soil properties and processes? And is this an area where there's been a lot of research in terms of, soil being an ecosystem itself? Can there be positive or negative impacts on the soil structure itself through adding these products?
That's a very, very good question, and something I decided that I wouldn't necessarily cover in this particular talk. Otherwise, I think it might have got very complicated indeed. But yes, I would have to do a bit more background if anybody wants more information. But reading through the 300 odd pages of our book on biostimulants, there's a huge amount of research just on the way biostimulants appear to work within the soil. So I've talked about the relationship with plants, but they seem to be really important in terms of potentially improving soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. So, for example, I think it's well known that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, they don't just generate benefit the plant, they also improve overall soil health, because of course they're key players in breaking down and making organic matter available in soils. So you're right, that's another huge topic in itself. They do have a major role to play in the general promotion of soil health, as well as their specific role in improving things like nutrient use efficiency in plants and their resistance to different types of stress. So that's a very good point.
Thank you. I imagine we could have about 10 webinars on this topic. So.
Absolutely.
So the next one, again, you did start to touch on this, but maybe just to reiterate to the group, we had a question on how can we ensure that we get independent data on biostimulant efficacy to help growers choose products which will genuinely work on their farms, or what are specific trials which should be done to ensure that the products are working efficiently?
I've mentioned some of that. So obviously, when products are approved, there's obviously a dossier of evidence. We've actually got a chapter on what that dossier usually consists of, but I didn't actually look at that in a lot of detail. So I can certainly follow up and say this is the typical evidence that you'd expect to see in a dossier, and therefore you can then decide whether that's enough for you. But my personal view would be that I would only want to consider a product if there had been some independent trial evidence. I know a number of universities have conducted either trials separately on use of a particular biostimulant in a particular crop, or they've worked with a company that's developing a product, but obviously they've done those trials independently. So if you can find that or certainly ask a supplier, have you got that independent evidence? Then I'd like to know what that is, and then it's certainly well worth visiting sites like AHDB, because they've got a lot of very good information on biostimulants in general, and I know that they've done some trial work as well, so you can get a better sense of, for example, I'm just having a look here. If you're using humic substances on wheat, I think, as I recall, the AHDB or was it possibly NIAB have done quite a detailed trial a little while ago now to show, well, did it seem to work in the trials that we undertook? So it's well worth referring to that as that as well. So I hope that's helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next one was, has there been many trials on produce grown in glass houses, so in protected cropping, i.e. potentially in sort of substrates rather than soil studies? And actually off the back of that, to build upon that, is there any potential sort of specific crop types or cropping sectors which you think could potentially benefit the most from biostimulants?
The short answer is I think a lot of the original research on biostimulants was in the horticultural sector and was in controlled environment like greenhouse conditions, because the great thing is that's a controlled situation, so it's actually much easier to research biostimulants and control all the variables like temperature and humidity, etc., which might either which might either promote biostimulant modes of action or inhibit them. So I think there is I can follow up with whoever asked the question with a bit more information by going back through all the chapters to look at some of the horticultural applications and the greenhouse applications. But that I think is an area where biostimulants have been possibly even used more than say in arable settings. So that I think there's been a lot of research and a lot of commercial use in that area.
Thank you. Another one was, has there been any research into the most effective time to apply biostimulants? For example, within a crop rotation, is it better to apply after the crop's been harvested before the next crop goes in? Or is it, for example, better to apply it as you're going in at the same time with the new crop?
Oh, goodness me. There's no simple answer to that because, all the different classes of biostimulants have very, very different properties, and they have different modes of action. And there's a lot of biostimulants combine different modes of action. So, partly given the kind of characteristics they have and their degree of stability, and partly given their modes of the particular modes of action you're focusing on, that then determines when you're going to put the biostimulant, when you're going to apply the biostimulant. So I think there's as many answers to that as there are crops and biostimulants. So it's very much a question of deciding what it is you want the biostimulant to be doing, and then obviously talking to the supplier, who obviously that should be their area of expertise on. You should apply it. So for example, some biostimulants are provided a seed coating, so obviously it's at the point of planting, and then other biostimulants I've seen trials where you apply them fairly early before you start applying fertilizer, and the idea is that they then replace the need for fertilizer use, so you then time it with the subsequent fertilizer application. But the timing is definitely very, very sort of product and crop specific, and it varies enormously, as does the method of application. There are enormous range of methods of application. So for example, I think you've got things like application to soil, soil drenching, where you apply it to the base of the plant, foliar application, application as a liquid or as a pellet. So there's a bewildering range of ways in which you can apply these, both in terms of timing and the method of application.
So fairly specific to the crop and the cropping sector.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's no one size fits all, which in a sense, sort of points you to this broader question about regenerative agriculture, in that it is a more regenerative agricultural practice are more sort of complex and context specific practices than, for example, that the sort of post-war push towards a kind of uniform applications of pesticides and fungicides, which were obviously at the time incredibly successful in producing dramatic increases in yields. But we're now kind of moving to what is a more sort of complex, context-specific sort of set of practices, which is obviously one of the big challenges in using them, but it's also a great opportunity, because if you can get the formula right, then you potentially end up with a more sustainable sort of farming system that is contributing to the route to net zero, which we're all traveling at the moment.
Thank you. So we'll just squeeze in one final little quick fire question to round up the webinar. So the last one is, what do you think is a group or a type of biostimulants which has shown the most potential in terms of there's been the most trials or the most studies showing that it has sort of proven efficacy? Is there any area of biostimulants that you're most excited about in terms of future benefits to the industry?
That's quite a difficult question to answer. I'm aware, and this is sort of simply going through all the chapters in the book, that for example, humic substances are pretty well established, and I think there's quite a detailed body of research on their use in a range of crops. But and also it's certainly the case that there's been a lot of research on arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and plant growth promoting rhizobacteria. But I'm probably not expert enough to say they're always the front runners. What you will find is that different biostimulants work in different contexts. So they may be the ones to look at first, but they may not be the final solution that you eventually arrive on in terms of what you want to achieve.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Francis.
Okay.
That was fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Francis. It's been fascinating, and I've certainly come out of this wanting to know much more about this topic. And yeah, just your knowledge around the whole area, I think, is really shown and is hugely valued by everyone in the audience. So thank you so much.
No,
Um,
pleasure.
and thank you, Meg, for pointing the questions, which yeah, I think some of them were really um, interesting points. So many thanks to our audience for sending those through, and also I see a lot of comments of asking for your notes. From the notes from Francis, so we'll make sure to send those out after the session.
Great.
We'll leave it there and look forward to seeing many people in our next surgery, which is on the 12th of April. But please do check that date. And do look out for an email from the Leaf team for more details on that in the coming weeks.
Mm.
But meanwhile, enjoy the rest of your Fridays and weekends. And thank you again.